German Field Marshal Alfred Jodl once said of George S. Patton, he was the American Guderian, bold, daring, and fond of great movements. He took big risks and achieved great success. But opinions among the German High Command were far from unanimous. Their views of the Allied leadership ranged from grudging admiration to open contempt, shaped by their battlefield encounters, by ideology, and by the shifting tides of war itself. Through the words and reflections of Germany's own generals, we can uncover how they truly regarded their enemies, and how those opinions evolved as the war turned against them. Let's explore what Germany's most experienced commanders really thought of the men who led the Allied armies to victory. In the chaotic aftermath of the Second World War, Allied interrogators interviewed hundreds of captured German officers. They wanted more than military intelligence. They wanted to know what these men, some of the best trained military minds in Europe, had thought of their adversaries. The results were striking. German opinions of Allied generals were not shaped by propaganda or ideology alone. They were forged in fire, by defeat, by exhaustion, and by the grudging recognition of a worthy opponent. Of all the Allied commanders, none fascinated the German officer corps more than General George S. Patton. To them, he was the living embodiment of their own martial ideals, fast, aggressive, and unrelenting. Heinz Guderian, the father of the Blitzkrieg, once remarked that Patton's maneuvers mirrored his own principles. From the standpoint of a tank specialist, Guderian said, "I must congratulate him, for he acted as I would have done." It was rare praise from a man who helped revolutionize modern warfare. The Germans saw in Patton a kindred spirit, an officer who scorned bureaucracy and worshipped momentum. His insistence on mobility, his belief that war was movement, resonated with men like Guderian and Rommel, who had built their reputations on speed and initiative. To the German High Command, Patton seemed almost too German in his methods. General Günther Blumentritt, who had planned invasions of France and Poland, called him the most aggressive panzer general of the Allies. What impressed the Germans most was not just Patton's victories, but the way he fought them, with audacity, precision, and sheer willpower. Patton's philosophy of warfare aligned perfectly with the Wehrmacht's concept of Auftragstaktik, mission-type orders, where commanders set objectives but left subordinates free to decide how to achieve them. It was a doctrine that prized creativity and initiative, and it made Patton seem, in their eyes, a mirror image of themselves. Yet admiration was never universal. Many German officers regarded Patton as tactically brilliant but strategically reckless. They viewed his lightning-fast drives across France as dazzling but often impulsive, chasing personal glory more than military necessity. His rush to Messina in Sicily, for example, was seen as an act of showmanship rather than strategy. Still, even those who criticized him conceded that his presence electrified the battlefield. German tank crews spoke of Patton's advance as if it had a personality of its own, a force that never slept, never paused, and never hesitated. To them, Patton symbolized the terrifying energy of American industry harnessed through one man's will. Not all German commanders, however, viewed the Americans through such a lens of respect. Many believed that the US Army, though well-equipped, lacked the professionalism and discipline of the Wehrmacht. They argued that American victories were owed more to material superiority than tactical mastery. In their eyes, the US Army was an industrial army, not a warrior's army. And yet, as the war went on, that perception began to crack. The Normandy campaign, the breakout from St. Lo, and the relentless advance across France proved that American commanders had learned fast, very fast. What the Germans once mocked as inexperience became, by 1945, a form of adaptability that unnerved them. If Patton represented German admiration, then Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery represented their frustration. To most German generals, Monty was everything they despised in an opponent. Cautious, deliberate, methodical. His slow, attritional tactics at El Alamein and Normandy infuriated the Wehrmacht's risk-loving commanders. But beneath that disdain was something deeper, a grudging recognition that Montgomery's caution was often justified. Rommel himself, though frustrated by Montgomery's lack of daring, admitted that the British commander was no fool. Montgomery understood logistics, he understood preparation, and, most importantly, he refused to play into German hands. Rommel's famous comment, spoken after capturing British officers in North Africa, "You fought like lions and were led by donkeys," was less about mockery than disappointment. The German High Command knew the British soldier was among the toughest in Europe. What they doubted was the leadership directing him. Yet as the war dragged on, those views began to evolve. General Siegfried Westphal, one of Rommel's key staff officers, later admitted that British forces earned German respect the hard way. The hardest in attack, he said, and the most persistent in defense were the British divisions. To the Germans, British professionalism was undeniable. They admired the discipline, the composure under fire, and the refusal to surrender even when hopelessly outnumbered. What they struggled to understand was Britain's command philosophy, a system that valued consensus and restraint, traits alien to the fast-paced doctrines of blitzkrieg. Hermann Goering, though an egotistical and often delusional figure, expressed one of the more candid moments of German respect for Britain. Speaking of the de Havilland Mosquito aircraft, he raged, "It makes me furious when I see the Mosquito. The British knocked together a wooden aircraft and it outpaces everything we have." It was a rare confession of technological inferiority from the Luftwaffe's supreme commander. The Germans viewed British innovation with mixed feelings, admiration tinged with envy. The radar network that saved Britain in 1940, the cryptographers who cracked Enigma, and the quiet, methodical intelligence work that supported Allied offensives, all of it impressed a military machine that prided itself on technical mastery. But no Allied army transformed German opinion as radically as the Soviets did. When Operation Barbarossa began in June 1941, most of Hitler's generals viewed the Red Army with contempt. Nazi ideology had painted Slavs as subhumans, incapable of modern warfare. The Germans expected a quick, decisive campaign, perhaps 6 months at most. Instead, they encountered something they had never faced before, an enemy that refused to die. At first, the Red Army seemed disorganized, poorly equipped, even desperate. Entire Soviet armies were surrounded and destroyed. Yet the deeper the Germans advanced, the fiercer the resistance became. Cities refused to surrender. Soldiers fought to the last bullet. Field Marshal Ewald von Kleist, reflecting years later, admitted the shock. "From the very beginning," he said, "the Russians proved themselves first-class warriors. Our successes in the first months can be explained only by better training. Once they gained experience, they became first-class soldiers." The transformation of German perception reached its peak at Stalingrad. What began as another siege turned into a nightmare. The Red Army's encirclement of the Sixth Army shattered the illusion of German superiority forever. When the frozen remnants of the Wehrmacht were captured in early 1943, even the most arrogant generals realized they had underestimated their foe. Stalingrad became more than a military defeat. It was a psychological reckoning. The same officers who once mocked the Soviets now spoke of them with awe, even fear. The Red Army's capacity for sacrifice, its willingness to fight in conditions no Western army could endure, left an indelible mark on the German psyche. General Franz Halder, chief of the Army General Staff, wrote bitterly in his diary, "Russian troops are fighting with the greatest tenacity and severity. Their endurance is astounding." It was a far cry from the arrogance of 1941. By 1944, the German High Command had no illusions left. They faced an enemy that had learned from its mistakes, rebuilt its army, and adapted with terrifying speed. Soviet operational art, the use of deep battle, massive coordination, and deception, had surpassed the tactical brilliance of blitzkrieg. The hunted had become the hunter. In contrast, Hitler himself maintained a bizarre mixture of hatred and admiration for the British. He had long seen them as natural allies, fellow Aryans misled by what he called Jewish influence. This warped perception affected German strategy early in the war, leading to fatal hesitation during the Dunkirk evacuation and misplaced hopes for negotiation. But his generals, hardened by years of combat, knew better. They respected the British and Americans not because of ideology, but because of what they had endured and how they had learned. The Allies' coordination, their ability to combine land, sea, and air power on a global scale, astonished even the most experienced German staff officers. After 1945, when Allied intelligence officers questioned these men, many spoke candidly. Some expressed admiration, others bitterness, but nearly all agreed that the Allies' strength lay not in any single commander, but in their collective adaptability. The Germans saw Patton as their equal in aggression, Montgomery as their superior in preparation, and Zhukov, the Soviet titan, as their conqueror in sheer determination. In the end, even the proudest German field marshals recognized that the Allies had mastered the art of modern war, not through genius alone, but through relentless learning, coordination, and sacrifice. The same men who had once marched through Poland and France now looked back with astonishment at the vast industrial armies that had crushed them. The Americans, with their limitless supply lines. The British, with their unyielding morale. The Soviets, with their inexhaustible will. To understand what the German generals thought of their enemies is to understand the evolution of respect born from ruin. It is the story of men who entered the war believing themselves invincible and ended it acknowledging that they had met and been defeated by worthy foes. In the ruins of Berlin, as the smoke cleared and silence replaced the thunder of artillery, the surviving German generals were forced to confront a bitter truth. They had been outthought, outproduced, and outlasted, but they had not been outclassed by amateurs. They were defeated by professionals, commanders who, though different in temperament and doctrine, understood the grim mathematics of total war. Patton's aggression, Montgomery's discipline, and Zhukov's relentless determination each reflected a face of the Allied war machine that Germany could not overcome. Perhaps that is why, decades later, many former German officers spoke of their adversaries not with hatred, but with a strange, reluctant admiration. Because in the end, war is the harshest teacher, and respect is often its only lesson. What do you think? Which Allied commander do you believe earned the deepest respect from the German generals, Patton, Montgomery, or Zhukov? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this documentary, make sure to like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell for more deep dives into the untold stories of World War II. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.